Welcome to On Scene. I'm Mason Matthews.
And I'm Joey Huffman.
And we have another Huffman with us again here today. We have our emergency management coordinator for the city, Jerry Huffman. So I want to thank Jerry for being here today.
Thank you.
Got a lot to talk about today. We had the opportunity the other day, Joey and I, to be a part of our preparedness drill that you kind of headed up and put together here in the city. And I guess first and foremost, tell us what is a preparedness drill? What do we do while we were out there?
Well, as you know, fire department usually works on fire department stuff.
Yes, sir.
Police work on police stuff, and the water department works on the water department stuff. And so I don't want to use the term silo, but we kind of do y'all know what y'all are doing. You work with your other departments, other agencies, seldom and rarely, except on a car wreck scene, y'all are working with the police and maybe the street department. The preparedness drill is trying to get everybody to understand that no department is going to solve a disaster. If we have something drastic happen in San Angelo and Tom Green County, then we as a team will handle that and come up with the correct solutions. And so team building is more what it's about. When we talk about the preparedness drill, it's team building to know that put a face on the space, have a discussion, have a conversation with somebody about here's the problems, what are the solutions.
One thing I thought was very interesting in that was how many people were in there.
Yes.
How, like you said, it's no one department's going to solve this problem. I'd forgotten how many departments there were in the city and department heads to come together to try to mitigate, something like that. And then to see that many people in the room all working together towards one goal, I just, it was good to see, but I just have forgotten how many departments.
Well, let's talk about it. So let's name drop. Or at least position drop some of the people that were there that day. I too.
Shannon Hospital well represented.
Yes.
Law enforcement with the sheriff's department and the police department well represented. Of course, fire department, y'all were there. Streets operations was there. Water department was there, and everybody wasn't invited. So as you look at that number of people, that wasn't even everybody.
Right.
That was just the ones that we thought could fit in that room for the scenario that we were going to present, which was a tornado through the fairgrounds.
Right.
So a Texas Animal Health Commission, people like that. So, and then TDM, you notice we had several state emergency managers there. So that really wasn't even the entire number that would be in a real situation.
Right. Well, I do think for even it being a drill or a scenario, getting to put a face with all of those agencies and organizations. And as we went through the scenario that we used and start thinking about, there were problems that came up that were presented. And I thought, you're thinking, oh man, we do need the water department, or man, we need, having, just some of the things that you don't think about until it's a problem. And I imagine the real thing is going to be 10 times that. So I was amazed. I thought it was excellent. I was, fortunate to be a part of it. I don't know. I think some things came up. Even you talked about this. Water may not deal with emergency incidents every day. Fire department does. But even as someone who deals with it every day, there were some things that came up in there that you don't think about every day. And something that we can't just fix ourselves. We do need the water department. We do need street bridge.
Something that I thought was, we can't do our job without them.
Yep.
The street and bridge, clearing streets so we can even get to where we're going. We can't even get our trucks to where they need to be without street and bridge. And so it was good to see that work together.
And let's talk about the drill itself. So Jerry, you alluded to it. You already said it. So let's talk about we've got it's almost rodeo time here in San Angelo. So we used that. I thought it was timely for everybody that was in there and where we're at right now. So I'm glad I think it presented where our minds are already thinking as we get near to the rodeo starting, what the fairgrounds are going to look like, how much is out there, kind of the setup out there. So the drill that we used is that, a tornado, and this is, we just had some tornadoes recently in Texas. So this was, when we did this drill, it was a week or two before that happened. So it ended up being somewhat realistic, or could be very realistic. So we used basically a scenario where we had some bad weather. We had the National Weather Service there at the drill. The way the scenario started out is we started going through with the, National Weather Service started talking about their warnings and how they put out their warnings. So they were basically standing there and giving us the warnings and stuff that we're seeing on social media and via our cell phones.
The exact same thing you'd see in the real deal.
It was very realistic, and they started almost a week out, right? Giving you a forecast for the next 7 days, and then the next 5 days, and then in the next 2 days, and then the next hour, and then basically what happened was it developed into, we had a tornado that was out of the north side of town and basically took out that area, that the fairgrounds and coliseums, and create lots of damage, and then basically you said go, and we had to mitigate this emergency and between everyone figure it out. So tell me, I'm sure you've done a multitude of preparedness drills in your career. Tell me a little bit about I guess how'd we do. You looking from you very clearly, and I think I'll speak for everybody in the room. I think it was very clear you are incredibly organized and know how to put this together. And I just, the exercise was incredible. Tell me a little bit about some of the stuff you saw pertinent to San Angelo the other day, and how do you think we stack up?
Well, one of the challenges over the years that experience has helped me understand is that trying to build a scenario that is realistic, but don't push the envelope too far, because there's a meteor the size of Texas headed toward Earth. Probably not going to be much of a winning scenario. Okay, right. So you got to go within what is. There's always those possibilities, but I try to work with an exercise is the probabilities. Mm-hmm. So in the scenario that we had, the probability of a storm is great. It's more likely that it'll be a heavy rain or a hail event. But the tornado is even the gust front winds off of one of these storms can do a lot of damage. Right. So I wanted to make that realistic. And then the idea again, if it's springtime and you're in Texas, it's tornado season. Mm-hmm. So it could happen at any time. I drew this scenario up back in January and February because I've been through springtime in Texas before. It's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And as you said, the National Weather Service can predict the potential for storms days ahead of an event. And so they start putting that information out. Unfortunately, unless you're in the business that we're in, we don't always pay attention to those warnings, which my first challenge to anybody watching our show today is pay attention to the warnings. Mm-hmm. Because what you hear today may affect you 2 days from now. Yeah. So the storms that just happened this past weekend and stuff, we knew about those. We knew that the chance was there days before, and sure enough, it happened. What you cannot always say is which street it'll go down, but which part of Texas, where in Texas, that the chances are greater. So with that being said, we have these large events, whether it be a football game down at the stadium. We have so many in San Angelo. We're very blessed to have a lot of different things going on. Our River Stage event, we chose the stock show and rodeo simply because it's a pretty popular event. Mm-hmm. And as you said, most people can visualize pretty much what's going on out there. If you've ever had to find a parking spot or try to walk up through there, it's yes, a lot of people in one place. So you take two things that are facts. A lot of people in one place, bad weather, those two things collide. The only thing that can left to happen is that something's going to go terribly wrong. Mm-hmm. So would every building out there be destroyed? Depends on the size of the tornado. Would everybody be able to find shelter? Again, depends on the warning and how much time we have. So I wanted people, all the departments, to think about if this were to happen, and I think the probability is pretty good that something could happen. That what would we do, and how prepared are we? And really what I wanted this particular exercise to deal with is, if you'll notice, some of the numbers I used were over what anybody could handle. 200 people injured is, in the real world scheme, that's not a big number, but for that's a big number. In
it's a lot.
And so not all of those would be severe. Some of them would be walking wounded. Some of them would be taking themselves to the hospital or other places. But those are the kinds of things. What would you need? Where would you get your help from? How many counties away would you have to get an ambulance from if you needed more ambulances, more law enforcement, more whatever?
Well, one of the things that you said at the beginning of the scenario to everyone in the room was, this is not meant to put anybody on the spot or necessarily to be a test, but one of the things you said is, I want you to come away with this with more questions than answers. And I sure did. There were some things I just didn't even think about.
Sure.
And you start talking about, I think we had something like 200, we estimated possibly 200 people injured, you start looking at hospitals and availabilities and where they can go. And that, the other thing that one of the things I didn't really think about it, but being in the line of EMS and fire, okay, we have this emergency happening out on the north side of town, and we're trying to mitigate it and get it corrected, but there's still a whole other town that's still happening, and life's still going on, and wrecks are still happening, and people are still having medical emergencies, and there may be still fires, and you've got to, you can't dump all your resources out there because you still have to protect the city. There was more. I walked away with more. Well, what are we going to do about that? And so on our side, I think it absolutely checked all the boxes.
Even with that, talking about coming away with more questions than answers, how are we going to, what if, what is the likelihood, the probability that this would happen or that would happen? I know that in that scenario, we're talking about a tornado, but even since then, we had an event here in town that brought a lot of people together in a small space. And we, as a department, we were talking about, if this event happens and it goes badly, where are these people going to go? How are we going to get in and out of there? So it really spurred, for every scenario of that kind, how are we going to handle this?
And that event that you're talking about, we literally, you and I got together and we said, hey, remember in the drill the other day, we did A, B, C, D.
Absolutely.
Same thing? Yeah, same thing. It was almost like a play.
Yep.
So
and that's a good point, that it really doesn't matter what the scenario is.
Right.
The response is always the same. So whether this is a football game and there's a car explosion, fire out in the parking lot and people are hurt, or whether it be a river stage event or whatever, it doesn't really matter what the scenario is. The response is, okay, we're going to need everything we've got, and we're going to need some other stuff.
Right.
Where's that other stuff come from? Because as you said, a house fire on the south side, while there's a tornado on the north side, is just as important.
Yes, sir.
So how will we deal with that? Many years ago, I heard that the state of California ran a exercise like this, and it was a zombie attack. The probability of zombie is not too high, but it doesn't really matter because the response to it is exactly the same.
Right.
When you have a need for resources, where are those resources coming from? And how will they get there? And how, once they get there, how will you manage them? That's what emergency management's all about, is that get them here, get the right people here at the right place at the right time, and then manage them.
Well, not only that, I think as a fire department, and I can only speak to the fire department, but every day, just before we were getting ready to set this up, Joey's radio is going off, and we're talking about some of the runs that are coming in. We've got a pretty good idea of what the fire department's going to do today and what they're capable of doing today and what a day is going to look for us. We don't know what runs are going to come in, but we kind of know, and we know how we're going to respond to them and how we're going to deal with them.
Sure.
I think what's important about that, whether it's a zombie attack or it's a weather-related event or something like that, I think it's important to talk about, because even though you know what your agency does, you don't really know what it's capable of doing. You know what its every day looks like, but what could we really do if we're stressed to the limits? And I talk about stress because this event itself stressed at least the fire department almost to overstressed, to the point where you've got to think, okay, I don't have enough. Yeah. Now what?
And that was the intent of it, get us to the point where we don't fall back on that next truck or that next, we'll call the next station.
You may not have it.
The next alarm.
Right.
There's no more alarms to be made. There's nothing else coming. Right. And whether that be in law enforcement or the fire or in public works, is that we need a big crane. The biggest thing we got is not big enough to do what we got to do.
Right.
Where does it come from? How fast can we get it here? I've been working with the railroad locally here, and talking about how fast could we get heavy duty stuff in here, and we're talking about 4, 5, 6 hours. And again, we have railroads all through town. We have transports of ethyl, methyl, whatever, all through town. These are all things that we need to be very prepared to deal with should something happen.
I like that it put us in the mind frame of, we practice all the time, standard practice equals standard results. Every time we go to a small structure fire, we handle it like it was a 4-alarm structure fire.
Same thing every
the
time.
Command system is the same. The management of it is the same. And so whenever this event came up downtown in the last couple of weeks, brought a lot of people into a small space, what would we do? Those calls were already being made. I told you, you were my first call. We contacted the medical director, got him involved. If we need you, this is where we will be. We had gone down there with the ambulances and set up and looked at this, just being prepared. And I think, again, I love that it put us in the mindset of, even on small events doing this, then hopefully it will be better prepared for a large event. Can you ever be fully prepared for an event of what we're talking about? I don't know that you can, but I think that we can be better prepared, and I like that.
I'll tell you the other thing maybe something that you or all three of us having all worked in fire and EMS field, unified command, right? So that's something we're taught early on in our career about, everything goes through one place. Everybody's on the same page. We all use the same terminology. Everybody knows what everybody's doing. Everybody knows that you're the chief and what you say, this is what we're going to do. And I know that the lieutenant does this. And not all the organizations and agencies that were in there understand that concept. Right. And, something that's as second nature as us putting gloves on a call is not second nature to them. They're not set up to deal that way. So what was really cool is to see for them too. I think we got there in this drill. We got there. Our battalion chief that day, Chief Barnett, he was the one that was kind of setting everything up as the battalion chief that would be the first one there. Boots on the ground first, I guess you could say. And he set up right away. He set up some command points and kind of told everybody, gave them a brief. Hey, this is how unified command works, and everything's going to go through me. Yep. So he almost kind of taught unified command right there. But you can, as it went along, and we started, we set up multiple command points during this our drill the other day, and I think everyone saw how important unified command was, as well. We know why. I think it's important that everybody else in the room sees why that's so important. I don't think you're going to get much done if you don't have some time.
You've heard it said that
you'll get too much redundancy, and you'll be the same people will be trying to go out and do the same thing because everybody sees a need. And that's one of the things about unified command is that they set the priorities. We call them objectives. So there may be 50 things that need to get done, but you've only got enough resources to do 10 of those. Who gets to pick the 10? Unified command. And so for the average department to say, we're going to let that burn, or we're going to let that go, or we're going to let that just go ahead and continue to leak because our priorities are elsewhere. That's hard for even us. I mean, everybody that has a house fire, you want to go deal with. Everybody that has a heart attack, you want to go deal with. But what do you do when you get to that place where we got to pick?
I think that goes back to the too many cooks in the kitchen, and if you're not careful, everybody's just running around at some point. And like I said, I think to bring that into order, I think that a lot of times when we get on scene, at least as first responders, we're bringing order to the chaos, and sometimes that is the best thing that we can do, regardless of what the chaos is. If we can just start to bring some order to it, things at that point begin to fall in place. And so again, I think that not only the fire department, but the other departments that are there to understand a little bit more how we operate and understand why it starts to bring some order to what's going on out there.
Well, and one of the other things I wanted, to kind of bring up and Jerry, have you speak to, as the emergency management coordinator, any type of emergency that comes in, not just weather, not just this. I mean, you're going to be right smack dab right in the middle of it. One of the things that you said earlier and you mentioned, and one of the things that we're all taught as firefighters is, when you roll up on something and when it comes in, one of the first things is, what do you have, right? What are you seeing, right? What are you doing, and what do you need?
What do you need,
right? One of the things that you mentioned earlier is realizing what you're going to need and going ahead and calling for that now, because by the time you need it, it's too late.
It's too late.
This exact drill overtasked our law enforcement, our fire and EMS, our hospital within 2 hours, to the point where there was nothing else. We were kind of covering the city, trying to mitigate an emergency, and we were out of resources. What are we going to do now? Who are we going to call now? We're going to have to call another city. There's an hour and a half, 2 hours of drive time, but they've got to figure out what they can send because they still have to cover their city too. So I mean, there's all these little things that you just don't think of until it's time. Talk a little bit about that. How one of the things we use in this drill is we talked about a 2-hour goal, a 6-hour goal, and a 12-hour goal. And one of the things I know the fire department talked about at a 12-hour goal was starting to get people replaced at 12 hours. At 12 hours, they're going to be tired mentally, physically. We're going to need some replacement of personnel. Well, you can't figure that out at hour 11 and a half, That's really something you need to be thinking about at hour 3, right?
Well, in 8 hours, it's something you would have known at hour 1,
right?
That this is going to go all night.
Yes, sir.
We're going to be here all day tomorrow. So how do I start spanning this out to where I have the resources I need? Because, you're going to get somebody hurt if they're out there fatigued, wore out. And of course, it's been it happens at every disaster I've ever been to where you tell a police officer or a firefighter, you go home, get some rest. No, I'm good. Be that as it may,
Right.
I can't keep working you. It's just not safe.
It's a risk. It is.
And so, one of the things that we try to do is to get people, if you go back to Winter Storm Uri, there were a lot of things, as you mentioned earlier, we don't know what we don't know yet. So we think that we got things covered, and then out of the blue, some question comes up. So we were exiting a water issue and going into the disaster of the frozen and then the power grid failing. And so you're kind of, you like to be proactive, but sometimes you're just really good at reacting. We know that people are going to need help. They're going to need shelter. They're going to need, food, water. They're going to need those human needs. And so, looking ahead, saying in whatever situation we have, we're going to look to that need. Last week we had a South Plains outbreak day. That in the wildfire terms, that means it's a bad day for fires. And early in the day, it just occurred to me that if one of our surrounding communities was to be overwhelmed by wildfire, which it could because the resources, by the time they get there, the buildings, you could already have the town burned down, as it did in Cross Plains and many years ago. So I started talking to city management and others to say, okay, if it was to happen, what would we do? Just again to put everybody, are you thinking about it? And then about 3 hours later, I get a call that there's 2 fires that are threatening area communities that may need to evacuate. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to come here, but it's just the idea that when you look at that, so when the National Weather Service says a line of severe storms is approaching,
Right.
So you got to pay attention to what's going on around you. And it doesn't necessarily mean just in San Angelo. Weather happens over a big area. So if there's something happening out west headed our way, there's a good chance it's going to be our problem too.
Right.
And guess what? When it leaves here, it's going to go be
going somewhere
Brady's
else.
problem and Waco's problem, just like the ones the other day. So I just want to make sure that if we're thinking about being prepared, it is what happens when I get to that. I've got 10 people. When number 10's given an assignment, and that next assignment comes in, where's number 11 coming from? And that could be from your cache of reserves that are sleeping and resting, ready for the next shift, or it could be from your neighboring towns. Whatever that means, each department's got to develop some kind of an idea. What would I do if?
And talking about that if, we, again, going back to coming away with more questions and answers, we talked about the weather. And like you just said, once it leaves San Angelo, it's going to be, the next person's problem, the next person's problems. Well, one of the things that we, I guess, used during our drill was we were calling other towns, asking for help. And the storm's on the way to there, is on the way. So what was just our problem is about to be their problem. We're asking for resources. They're likely to possibly want to sit on their resources because they know what's headed their way. It gets your mind going into these places that it doesn't normally go. One of the things that we were talking before we started airing here was one of the things that got brought up that I didn't even think about. We used the rodeo, right? We talked about how many people are out at the fairgrounds, but one thing we didn't talk about, or I didn't even think about, was all the animals that are at the fairgrounds. So what we used is basically during one of the rodeo performances, right? It's loud in there. Nobody's really paying attention. They have phones going off. Oh, it could be a tornado. Well, it's always the weather opens up around San Angelo. We don't get any rain and it moves right on, right? So no one's paying attention. And then something happens. And now we've got horses running around at the fairgrounds. We've got bulls running around the fairgrounds. And that was a whole nother, if the damage to the buildings and the injuries to the people and everything that aren't bad enough. Right. While the responders have moved trees and everything to get in there to help, now we've got these 3,000-pound animals running around. Right. Just all these things I just never thought about. Yeah. I thought it was a wonderful drill to get your mind somewhere that it doesn't normally go. So. And
with that, our local animal control can do so much, and they have resources to reach out. There's county agents. There's a long line of people that deal with those kinds of things on a regular basis. I mean, it's not the first time that if a 18-wheeler full of animals, cows, sheep, whatever, was to turn over, it wouldn't be the first time it had happened. But now it's happened in the middle of all of this other. And so, again, you're getting short on cowboys. Can you imagine that, the one resource you need is cowboys, and all the ones you have are busy doing something?
Right.
I'd also like the idea that, sometimes you see these things on the news. You just saw the tornado, Possum Kingdom, and they were having to deal with that and what was going on. But you don't always, as a citizen watching TV and thinking, wow, that's incredible, or how horrible that is. You don't see the preparedness that goes into that.
Right.
And so one thing I want the citizens to know is, behind the scenes, day to day, these departments are coming together. Your position especially, bringing these things together to help prepare for when it does. All anybody's ever going to see is the news the day that it happens.
Right.
The months going into that.
They see the after effects.
Exactly.
They see them cleaning stuff off and what happens since this. But you're right. I think the big deal, and that's really why we wanted to do today's episode on this, is I think it's important to know that these agencies, being gathered together by our emergency management coordinator and coming up with these, they're not far-fetched scenarios. We're coming up with these. What could possibly go down, and how are we ready? And if we're not ready, hey, let's come up with some ways to be ready.
Well, I believe the city of San Angelo and Tom Green County are as ready as anybody could be, expect to be. I mean, do we really want the budget it would take to have as we've talked about previously, a fire truck on every corner, a police officer on every corner? No, we can't afford that. But are we as prepared as it could be? And a lot of that preparation is simply thinking. Have you thought it through as to what the needs might be and how we might acquire those needs? So it isn't so much do you have, millions of dollars worth of equipment, but do you know where to get the equipment from? If that makes sense, in the idea that, I believe Tom Green County and the city of San Angelo have thought it through. And again, the exercise today or the other day was attended by state, local, federal, county. I mean, all partners there, from the National Weather Service, the federal, to the state agencies that were there and the local agencies that were there. So we are trying to make sure that in the event of something happening, we know who to go to at least bounce ideas off of, get some ideas from. Like I say, everybody would think of, well, first of all, you've got a 3,000-pound bull that's not in a good mood. What would you do about that? Realizing he's worth $100,000. So, somebody's going to kind of want him back.
Somebody's going to want that back.
Yes, they are. That's one of the things you brought the money. That was the other thing that we had some financial people in the room there as well. That was one part of it. I think we all know that everything costs money. But when you're in an emergency, when you're trying to save people's lives and protect property and do all these things, and you're thinking, well, yeah, money's important, but we'll worry about that later. What was interesting is there were some county people that were in our drill the other day, and they were bringing up some past disasters or things that we've had, events that we've happened, and they were talking about the years and decades that it took to recoup costs, and how important it was that everything that was done when the disaster was happening was recorded and recorded properly and turned in properly. So the other day while we're sitting there and all these departments are doing all these things and making all these decisions and calling in all these people and using all these resources, one of the things that the bean counters in the back of the room were going, hey, but that's important. You better make sure, take pictures, write this down, because for you to recoup, right? All of that, the time, the personnel, the equipment, the resources cost money.
Well, the city can't just call the state or the federal government at the end of this and go, yeah, it costs $4 million. We'll expect a check by the end of the week. That doesn't happen.
No.
They want to know where every dollar went and how's it accounted for, and that is due diligence on their part, and I get that. But if you have not been meticulous in how that's been kept up with, then there's dollars that you're not going to recoup, and that's dollars the city's going to do.
Well, you're right. And that's one of the things that I saw and that they were talking about is not only are the life-saving measures and the things you're doing that day matter, but 2 years later when you're turning in stuff for reimbursement or recoup, that matters too. That matters as much as what you did on the day, really. I mean, they're two really different issues, but that they're both really important issues.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. For us to be able to afford the lifestyle that we have, it means that we're being good stewards of our money. And so I think the city and county has a right to expect that we're all going to be good stewards of that. And one way you do that isn't that you don't spend it, but you account for that spending.
Sure. So let me ask you, so we've got, we did that drill the other day. I think everybody walking out of the room walked away with more questions and answers, thinking of other things that could happen, other ways that they could plug in something that they learned from that in other walks of their, their work days. How often do we need to be doing that? I mean, how often do we need to be having these preparedness drills?
Well, I think there's something to be said about if you have them too often, they lose their effect.
Right.
So we're going to have another one probably before December. I don't know exactly when, and what we'll probably do is pick up a different piece of emergency management other than the response. As you said, this was 2 hours, 6 hours, and 12 hours. What about 24 and 48 hours? Well, what does that look like, and how does the documentation piece of it start to get grounded and founded in that time frame? Some of the feedback I've gotten from the exercise was that they would like to see some other departments or agencies there, and that was an intentional because of the size of the room and what we were trying to accomplish there. But certainly in the 24 to 48 hour range, there would certainly be a lot of other agencies here, and they would be here in a big way.
Right.
For example, right now, today here in San Angelo, there are several strike teams from around the state. In fact, I had lunch today with some folks from Idaho that are here to fight Texas fires. So, those agencies, when they start coming in, they have a pretty big footprint on what they're bringing and can bring. So that's kind of where the next step would be whenever we have that, is that how do we prepare for this onslaught? It's one thing to ask for help, but are you prepared to get that help? Because again, no matter who comes to help us, they're here at so what do you want them to do? How are you going to manage these resources? So if you got a fire truck, go put out the fire. But what about all these other things that will come? You've got to be able to manage them and, again, account for all of that stuff. So I think that we are probably going to have one before January, but I don't know exactly when it'll be. We need to put some of the things that we learned in this one into play, and some of the things that they started thinking about, those warnings that we talked about from the National Weather Service. Maybe we need to get more involved with that kind of a deal and have somebody that literally is watching the skies for us, right there at the scene at the event, rather than saying, because think about how long would it take for a phone call from there to who to finally get somebody to shut something down or to warn people. And then by the time you do that, are you warning them to run into the danger or trying to get them to shelter? So there's a lot of things that have to be thought through as to what is a result of that action.
Well, I several things that I go to as a representative of the fire department, going to the schools for fire prevention or going to teach Stop the Bleed or active shooter training or whatever I go out to, one of the things I always say is that, there's a very fine line between being prepared and paranoid. And going out there the other day, I thought, okay, we're going to go have this disaster. It's going to be, unrealistic. Right? And then we got there, and all of this preparedness makes, you may be paranoid until the issue happens, and then, wow, we look really prepared. So that's the one thing that I really took away with it is there was a lot of people in there that are a lot more prepared than they knew they were. And I think will, in turn, after that drill, go back and become even more prepared.
That's what I thought. I think everybody in that room left. It went back to their department and thought, I'm going to go check this, or I'm going to make this phone call, or I'm going to check on that, because it brought up things that they're thinking about in their department. If something like this happens, I didn't think about that. I need to go check on that. And so I dare say that just because of that drill, the city of San Angelo is more prepared today than they were before that.
I do too.
And I dare say that, as we continue on with more drills and more thoughts into it,
I'm absolutely. I can't wait. I can't wait for the next one. Just some of the names with the agents and faces that we were putting with the agencies. Some of the things that they talked about that they had the capabilities of doing.
Yeah,
man, those are things that can be applied on a day. We've had 3 runs today in San Angelo that we could have used somebody on one of those things, and before I wouldn't have even known who to call, who to talk to. So for that alone, I think the takeaways there are huge. Well, Jerry, I appreciate you for coming. I appreciate what you do as emergency management coordinator for our community. I can tell you, your expertise is very valued in this community, and as a first responder, I know we're lucky to have you. The other day was impressive, and I just, like you said, I think everyone that was involved is more prepared today than they were before, walking in there. So,
when I come over at Christmas, I don't see a bunch of Christmas cards from all the citizens telling you thank you, but I know that everybody is greatly appreciative of what you do. So thank you for what you do.
Absolutely.
My pleasure.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here. Well, I guess that's going to do it for today. So until next time, I'm Mason Matthews.
And I'm Joey Huffman.
And we'll see you next time.
Next time.